Welcome to Phobail and Phobail's virtual Spring Festival, Féile in Earraigh 2021. This event is part of Phobail and Phobail's community engagement programme and is supported by the Executive Office, t-údar, Together Building Unity Communities, Good Relations. I have two guests, a writer and a photographer, Jan Carson and Niall Carson, no relation to each other, nor to Edward Carson. Niall hails from West Belfast, and Jan lives in East Belfast, a place and community celebrated in her writing, and in particular in her brilliant novel, The Firestarters. We're going to talk about their backgrounds, how they chose their professions, or maybe their professions chose them, and in what way their work interacts with communities or depicts communities and the challenges they face. So I'd like to begin, first of all, with you, Jan. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Yes, okay, that's okay, I couldn't see you there. So Jan, just tell me a bit about your upbringing, where you were born, etc., what circumstances, and how you came to become a resident of East Belfast.
Yeah, I mean, I had quite a strange journey to the arts. I'm from Ballymena originally, which you can probably hear in my dulcet tones. And I'm very much part of a community in Kells, just outside Ballymena, a wee village. And I grew up in a kind of rural, quite conservative Presbyterian community. So my folks and myself were all brought up very much in the church. And because of that, there really wasn't a lot of emphasis on the arts. In fact, sometimes the other way, arts was frowned upon. So I was a huge reader as a child, and my parents did really encourage me to read and took me to the library a lot. But I didn't come to writing until quite late. Moved up to Belfast to go to Queen's when I was 18, and I did study English literature, but I came out of my undergrad degree and I actually worked for the Presbyterian Church for a good number of years. And it was only at the age of 25, I took the Headstackers and I moved to the west coast of America for 4 years. And that's where I fell into writing. I fell in with a community of artists and writers out there in Portland and began experimenting, and that's how I've ended up where I am, really.
When you were in Portland, did you write about Portland or did you write about home?
Well, I was just thinking about this. I was talking to my students the other night about this, about getting into writing. And the first few years of writing, I wrote about everything, Danny. And I would pull these like crazy, mad 6-7 hour stints of just scribbling away whatever came to my head. And a lot of it wasn't particularly placed in America or Northern Ireland. It was in a kind of abstract, no place kind of writing. And it took me quite a while to come to writing about Northern Ireland. Maybe towards the end of the 4 years in America, I was starting to think quite objectively about where I'd come from and what that meant. And that was beginning to kind of infiltrate into my writing. And I think by that stage, I was starting to get a little better. The early stuff, I hope it just disappears forever. It was terrible.
You never know. Undiscovered treasures. There may be a few bob in those early manuscripts yet. Yeah. Maybe Boston College will buy them off you for a few £1,000 in days to come.
I hope we'll marry them.
Was there, I mean, what writers influenced you most? Were they female feminist writers? Were they Irish writers? Or were you an internationalist? Did you just had an eclectic influence on you?
The first writers I really fell in love with as a kid were Agatha Christie. She was a huge influence. I stumbled into the crime fiction department of the library when I was 8, which I'm not sure if it was terribly suitable, but it was a great experience. And then I came to writers that wrote about big issues, big kind of human issues. So I loved Emily Bronte. Wuthering Heights was a big influence. Loved Graham Greene. Graham Greene was one of those first writers for me that connected faith and writing. And those big questions about what it means to be human. And as I moved through, when I was in the West Coast, I read a lot of kind of beat literature, and I loved Richard Brautigan's writing, and the magic realist element started to come in whenever I was in the West Coast. So yeah, I'll read absolutely anything that comes across my path at this stage. I think there's always something to learn, whether it's nonfiction or poetry or theatre. The more you can read, the better, I think.
Okay, well, we'll come back to that in a second. Niall, you're from West Belfast. I'm not sure if you know this, but I'm pretty certain I went to primary school and perhaps even secondary school with your father.
Oh, yes, yeah. I know you lived around the corner from in Corby Way. Is that right?
That's right. Were you Bington Drive or Bernard Drive?
No, it was North Green.
Oh, North Green, yeah. Oh, in fact, the next street to me.
Yeah,
He lived, behind our back garden.
And great fond memories of my granny's house there, when we were kids,
So now tell us a bit about your upbringing, your Anderson's Town, although you've travelled the world since then.
Yes.
And, quite an award-winning photographer now. So I'd just like to ask you about your upbringing, the influences on you, and why you were attracted towards the profession of photography.
Well, so, I grew up in West Belfast, and it was, difficult enough circumstances, poverty, lack of jobs and all that. So there wasn't a lot of money for, holidays or things like that. Would have maybe gone up to Waterfoot for a couple of weeks during the summer and things like that, And it was an interesting upbringing as well, because my mum was very religious, really into sort of all the idolatry of the Catholic Church, statues and roses for St. Teresa, and interested in all these moving statues down in Mount Mallory and all sorts of stuff like that.
Oh, Lord.
My dad is a complete atheist, and from an early age, he was trying to put, philosophical ideas into my head, like, Plato's The Cave, or, the evil genius theory and things like that. Although he didn't say those terms, but he was using words that I could understand, So I had two totally conflicting ideologies in the house. And for up until I was about 18, 19, I was very religious myself and happy enough to be religious, and I would have enjoyed, listening to sermons in church and getting a good, sustenance from it. And I think it helped me, give me a bit of a moral compass as a kid, kept me out of trouble, kept me from getting into, bad situations that other people did. But then, as I traveled further and met different people of different religions from around the world and saw different just economic situations and all that, I started to then become skeptical about religion. And then, sort of I think that just happens to everybody who travels around the world. Your ideology just changes you absorb things from the people you meet. But so basically when I was a kid, I was one of those teenagers who just spent his weekends or his afternoons playing Sonic the Hedgehog and watching TV, and didn't really have any plan for my life as such.
Did you go to university?
No, I didn't. I went to Belfast Institute of Technology to do my photography course. But what happened was, when I was about 13, my mom or dad, I can't remember which one it was now, showed me an ad in the Andersonstown News for a photography workshop in Belfast Exposed, which would have been a chap called Danny Burke, now deceased, unfortunately.
Yes.
Lovely man, and gave a lot of his time to his craft and teaching young people like me, So I was more interested in the chemistry of it at the time, how to develop film and how to make print photographs. I thought that was fascinating. But then when we went there, I met people like Frankie Quinn, Sean McKernan, who are like street photographers, but artists as well. They started to get me interested in the actual art of taking photographs and also talking to people, breaking down barriers. And, it gave me a lot of confidence to go out on my own and do stuff. And then I went on work experience when I was 16 in the Irish News, and I met this man, Brendan Murphy, who became my sort of mentor for many years.
Great photographer.
Brilliant photographer. And he's put so many young people through his apprenticeship scheme in there who've went on to win awards, get great jobs. And even one of them, a fellow from Cushendall, Cahill McNaughton, has won a Pulitzer Prize. As far as I know, I think he's the only Irish person to win a Pulitzer Prize, So to come from that sort of humble beginnings to do that, Brenton's been very successful,
Well, what type of, when you lived in Belfast before you began your travels, and as you were learning your apprenticeship, were you simply en route to go out and do a news story? A car has crashed, go out and cover that? Or were there subjects or interests that you had in particular that maybe motivated because of your religious background or your political background or your community background?
Political at the beginning, because there would have been a lot of marches, a lot of funerals, a lot of murals. I liked murals as well when I was a kid. I liked watching people painting them, and I was interested in art in general. I did A-level art in school, and A-level photography as well. And so I combined those two things for both. I ended up doing the same dissertation for both subjects. It was a bit cheeky, like, you know. So, but yeah, it was really politics. I was interested in politics and things like wrongful convictions. You know, the Birmingham 6, the Guildford 4. Those were happening when I was a kid, and I was very interested in that. You know, and we were very skeptical, questioning family anyway, because, you know, my dad's atheism, and like, so that gave me an interest in, you know, what happens when law and order isn't you know, acted out the way it should be. You know, it's very interesting to get a young mind to get questioning authority at a very early age. Like, so that was what I was always trying to get, sort of pictures of, you know, riots and, you know, trouble at funerals and things like that. And Belfast Exposed, they actually give you a camera and told you to take it home and you could just do whatever you wanted with it. So I literally just photograph what was going on in the street outside my house and in Andytown where I lived. Like, and I mean, you know what it was like at the time in the 80s. It was absolute chaos. There wasn't much nice things to photograph, so I was able to photograph lots of interesting stuff, you know.
When do you think that you okay, that was your apprenticeship, but when do you think that you sort of rose above that and well, professionally moved beyond the confines of Belfast?
Yeah, well, that was Brenton Murphy, you know. So we went into the Irish News, like everybody who went in there, you know, you're coming from a very insular background, and he could see, you know, the rough edges with all the trainees, and so he would purposely make you go and do things that were out of your comfort zone, you know, and broaden your horizons. So he wanted everybody who left there to be a fashion photographer, sports photographer, you know, somebody who did politics, or, you know, and have a broad interest. So, but also I had a relative who was like involved in NGO work in Africa. And I always remember him giving us a slideshow in my granny's house when I was a kid of him with some Kenyan, you know, like tribal warriors, you know, and I was fascinated by this. So I always wanted to travel. And I was very lucky then to, when I was working in the Irish News, to go with some teachers from De La Salle School who were building, well, they had a plan to build a school in Ethiopia, but the project just got bigger and they had a lot of other things. And I saw some terrible stuff there, and I still, you know, that gave me a real bug then to travel and to do other things and try and have an interest in world politics, geopolitics, as well as just the situation here. Like.
Well, we'll come back in a few moments to some of your famous photographs, and you can tell us the background, the story to them. Just want to return to Jan. Jan, when you came back from America, did you come back with a broader mind? And, you know, what attracted you, for example, to settle in East Belfast as opposed to North Belfast or South Belfast or West Belfast?
Yeah, Danny, I mean, I didn't come back with any joy in my heart. It was a very reluctant return. I left whenever I was 25 just because, I don't know, Northern Ireland's such a small place and it had felt like a goldfish bowl, and I wanted to get out and be somebody different. So the move to America, not knowing a soul out there, was so freeing. So when you're asking it, did it free my mind up a bit? Absolutely. It almost overwhelmed me. It was just so much art and so many interesting new ideas and diversity. And I only came back because my work visa ran out. So that first year back in Belfast, I actually lived, the first year I was back, I lived up more South Belfast, in flats with friends, and I moved around a wee bit before I settled here in the East. And I think for me, the move to the East was almost a little bit reconciling myself with my past. I had grown up, my family, possibly a little bit like some of the ideas that Niall's talking about. My family were very religious, but they were quite apolitical. So they don't vote, they don't get involved in politics. There is a branch of Presbyterianism that's very, you know, don't get involved with the world kind of thing. And so I would have been very anti some of the kind of cultural things that go around Protestantism. So I would have been very anti anything to do with the Orange Order, anything to do with parades. That kind of stuff really frustrated me. And some of it I just didn't understand. I hadn't spent time learning about, finding out about, cultural heritage and history. So the move back to the East, and particularly working with community groups in this area, has been really freeing to find out a wee bit more about my heritage as a Protestant, to be able to be discerning and go, that stuff's really interesting and there's some value in it, but this stuff over here, I'm not sure about that. I don't think that's something I'd want to hold on to. So the last decade for me living here has felt like a big kind of exploration, a journey of learning a wee bit more about who I am, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yes, I mean, I think there's your writing, and particularly in the fire starters, is extremely honest and quite courageous, not just in the literary formats that you adopt in some of the stories, but I think, I mean, you've achieved something there. You managed to be cynical and yet extremely affectionate towards the people. I don't know how you achieved that, but it's there. It's embedded in it. It's beautiful writing about Belfast, but also about the east of the city. You can identify with the east of the city. You can see the problems are there, and you also make this. I mean, it's a point. I'm not sure if you would be particularly stuck on this point, but the suggestion, through the father, Sammy, the son, it's almost as if the sins of the father has been passed on to the son. So the father was a former paramilitary, but has settled down, and he now believes his son is one of the major incendiarists and behind this phenomenon of the fire starters in Belfast. I mean, you do a great job, I have to say, in representing East Belfast, but at the same time, you don't shy away from the problems and from the ugliness of some aspects of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of wee points there. Like, one of the things I wanted to really explore with the Sammy and Mark relationship was this idea that violence, and particularly male violence, is a complicated thing. Like, it's not always because of a political affiliation or a belief. Sometimes people just love the power that comes with violence, or they kind of lose the run of themselves. And there's that kind of inheritance of almost a legacy of loving the power that comes with violence that I think is inherited from father to son. And that's not peculiar to where we live. You see that played out. I'm sure Niall, as he travels around the world, has seen it in lots of different communities. So I wanted to do that. And I would kind of see myself as a critical friend, which is a little bit like what everybody is as a family member.
I think that comes across. Across.
Whenever you think about your own family, you probably love them to bits, but you can also point out, that thing that my aunt does, that drives me insane, and my dad, he needs to work on that. And that's what I want to, growing up in the church, there is this sense that, you have to learn to love people and to value people as your starting point before you come to the critical stuff. And I really want to try and bring that into all my writing. I'm working at the minute on a lot on evangelical Protestantism, so the kind of church communities around, what people would call born agains, and I need to bring that same value to it, that I see them as people to love and value first, and to criticize second. So yeah, that's very important to me in my writing.
What is in terms of your normal day, how much of it is devoted to engagement, or to teaching, or to writing?
Normal days have gone out the window a wee bit in the last year, but what I normally try to do is I give the best of myself to my writing. So I'm usually clearest in the morning, and I would get up and try to write for 2.5 hours, would usually get me 1,000 words. And then afternoons and evenings, I might, in a normal week, I might be doing 2 or 3 workshops or community groups. So those would be spread out across the week. And then obviously there's the preparation for that and the engagement with people beyond it. You always say, Niall will know this too, you always say, I'm going to stick within the boundaries of the time I've said, and it spreads out into your whole life. You're chatting to people, and it's the wonderful thing about doing community arts work in a community. When you dander down the road to Tesco's, you bump into people from your groups. I live quite close to C.S. Lewis Square, and I'm always bumping into people around here, and I love that. It makes me feel part of the community, and that I'm contributing something back to the community as well.
I suppose East Belfast is a bit like West Belfast. It's one big village. Where, I mean, I could be walking down the road and see somebody out of the corner of my eye and realize that, I went to primary school with them. There's just, and I love living in the place where I was born. I have no great need to run away or to escape. I just love where I've grown up. Now, you've been involved in taking many photographs in fraught and dangerous situations, but the two photographs that we're going to put up on the screen as you talk about them, the first one is of Ian Paisley, and I'd like you to, it's a great photograph, and I wonder how you captured that moment.
Well, it's probably my favorite picture that I've taken, because Ian Paisley he was a gift for photographers. He was larger than life, and every photographer that I know has got a picture of Ian Paisley that they love. But normally they're the kind of the scowling, angry Paisley, shouting at somebody or being ejected from a government building or protesting somewhere. And or the famous never 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 one outside Belfast City Hall. It's a fantastic photograph with all those people, but yeah, it was a more optimistic time. This was after Snandu's agreement, and it was the election to bring back Stormont, and I think it was just after that famous picture of Paisley and Adams, sitting in one of the rooms in Stormont. It was a just jaw-dropping picture to see the two of them sitting beside each other, with a big potted plant in the middle, but I mean, this for me was unbelievable, because I could never get anybody from the DUP or Sinn Féin in the same picture. You'll know from your former job, it was election counts could be fraught. There could be arguments. Well, there was people beating up Belfast City Hall and everything. It was crazy. So to actually get to the point where the two leaders of the two big parties were sitting at a table was really amazing, and I felt fantastic. Made me really happy when I saw it. I knew progress is being made here. So the election was called, and this was the canvassing for the election, and it was actually Pancake Tuesday, and the photo call was Ian Paisley flipping pancakes in the kitchen in the Galgorm Manor Hotel, and even those photographs were hilarious as well. He was very good at it, and he got some really funny pictures. But then afterwards, he was sitting down to do an interview with some journalists. So he sat in this big couch, beside a big window, some lovely light, didn't need any flash, it was perfect. And he was, one of the other photographers from the newsletter said to him, "Oh, give us the V for victory sign, like this here." And then Ian says, "Oh, that's for you, like this." And he started laughing. And so there was a couple of people there, and some people took the picture and other people didn't, because they were like, "Oh, is that, will he be annoyed?" And I was like, "No, that's brilliant," because it just showed his attitude at the time. He was totally relaxed, and because he knew he was going into the leadership to be the first minister and all that there, and he was confident getting into the election. And I just think it shows him a different light, and Northern Ireland in a more positive light at that time. And I was delighted when he died. The Guardian used that as their obituary photograph for him. A lot of everybody else went for them, the kind of hard line Paisley, because that was obviously his whole image up to that.
Well, what about the
What about
the other photograph of the wheelbarrow rat? I mean, you seem to have just caught that mid-air. What were the circumstances you taking that photograph?
So in 2006, Willie Fraser decided in his wisdom to have an Orange March on O'Connell Street in Dublin. And I was very surprised that the guards allowed that to go ahead. But I suppose, there was a purposeful people were trying to soften the relationship between the North and the South. And there was that famous picture of Bertie Ahern shaking Ian Paisley's hand, and they were handing over muskets to each other at the Boyne battle site and all that. This was happening at the time. So, it was a sort of, I can understand it. They wanted to try and show that, okay, we can accommodate each other here in some way. But they just picked the wrong day, because there was a Celtic and Rangers match on the TV. Every pub in Dublin was full. O'Connell Street was a building site. There was pickaxes lying everywhere, paving slabs. The Gardaí only had 25 people in the riot squad for the whole country, as far as I know at the time. So you had guards there who weren't trained and they didn't have the equipment to handle a riot. And you had drunken football fans, orange men, you know, it just was a recipe for disaster, you know. And then you had also just young kids who were in Dublin, you know, from the inner city, who didn't really care about politics, but they used that excuse of trouble to loot the place. And there was loads of shops, clothes shops looted and stuff like this, you know. So I took some pictures I couldn't believe, you know, just it was amazing. I actually swapped weekends with somebody to get working that week. I knew there was going to be trouble, like 2 weeks beforehand, you know. I changed my rota to get there, like, you know. And but that picture basically, it was just in the midst of the chaos, and all around me there was breaking glass and people fighting, photographers getting hit. And you heard Charlie Bird from RTE was famously punched inside a shop by a marauding crowd who were looting the shop as well. So it was really dangerous, but I was delighted with it because, I mean, the weight of that wheelbarrow, it's extraordinary, like, that somebody that size was able to throw it. But the funny thing was, you know, those shields that the guards are holding, they're very well designed, and it just bounced off it and fell on the floor. I thought the guard was going to be completely cleaned out, but he just held his nerve and had whatever stance, whatever way he held that shield, the thing just bounced back. And a couple of seconds later, your mom was in the paddy wagon and gone, you know.
Right. John, I was, because I love the Firestarter so much, I was going to ask you to read from it, but you have a new book coming out on the 1st of April, The Last Resort, which is a series of connected stories set in a caravan in Ballycastle. It sounds intriguing. So could you give us a bit of background to this forthcoming book and perhaps do a short reading for us, please?
Absolutely. When you put it like that, it sounds like, you know, the Father's Head episode with Martin in the caravan. It's set up in a caravan park outside Ballycastle, a fictional one, I'm going to stress in case I get sued or something. Over the course of the February sort of half-term break week, and it follows 10 different people in each of the caravans, and there's a series of crimes that happens, which I'm not going to go into and give you any spoilers, but it's really exploring kind of where Northern Ireland is now in terms of everybody's in a very separate wee bubble in their own life. A caravan sort of splits you up from each other in that way, and yet you see the kind of interconnection of the issues moving across the caravan site. And it covers a lot of the different issues that are coming up in Northern Ireland. So there's some dealing with the legacy of the past, but there's also looking at new influences coming in from Northern Ireland. There's a Lithuanian character who's fantastic, and his story comes into it. There's a story exploring dementia, which is something that I'm very passionate about, looking at how it's represented in our literature. We look at gender and sexuality and the family unit and what's happening there. But I wanted to read you a wee section from, you're not supposed to have favourite characters. It's a wee bit like saying, I've got a favourite child. But I really love this character of Anna. At the minute, I'm super interested in looking at evangelical Protestant women, which is the least sexy topic on the planet. I think they've been really hideously underrepresented in literature and film. They're either just coming at you with tea and tray bakes, or they're standing beside somebody like Paisley nodding along in a headscarf. And yet my experience of growing up in that community was that a lot of them were quite feisty, and they were very funny, and they were very past remarkable. So this is a woman called Anna, who is one of those past remarkable evangelical Protestant women who's stuck in a caravan with her dead mother. So there's a scenario for you for the weekend. And I'm just going to read you about 3.5 minutes of it. Pointless has just started when somebody hits the caravan door a wild clatter. Who's that? Snaps Mammy. I want to say, how should I know? What I actually say is, I'll just go and see. I'm 47, but I still wouldn't dare give her lip. Mummy gives me a right pissy look. She hates being disturbed during Pointless. She used to time the dinner around it, would sit on the sofa eating off trays while she shouted her answers at the screen. If I sat too close, I'd get shard and mashed potato. Too far away, and I couldn't reach to feed her. Mummy doesn't eat dinner anymore. She's had no appetite since she died. Doesn't stop her watching Pointless though, or insisting I have my dinner while it's on. It's only 5 o'clock. Nobody wants their dinner at 5. On the continent, they're just rising from their lunch. Not that I've ever been to the continent. Mummy didn't approve of it. We always took our holidays in Ayr. She liked Ayr. It was just as bleak as Ballymena, but they'd a sea you could look at through the rain. Now she's gone. There's nothing keeping me from the continent. Only she's not really gone, is she? She's still there, following me round the bungalow, nagging, dragging me to church, demanding we head down to the caravan every weekend. Nothing's changed. Nothing's ever going to change. Nobody else can see Mummy, but I can. She's doing my head in. I set my tray aside. Across the caravan to the door, Maggie waddles behind me, winding her fat body round my slippers. She's not as fast as she once was, though she still manages to trip me up 2 or 3 times a day. That wee dog has a murderous streak in her. She's made it abundantly clear I'm no substitute for Mummy. She's called after Maggie Thatcher. Mummy was a big fan of the Iron Lady. She'd the hair done her like her and all. The dog takes after her namesake. She won't do anything she doesn't want to. Dying being the first thing which comes to mind. Maggie's 19 now. Human years, not dog ones. That's ancient for Yorkies. I'm starting to wonder if she might be immortal too. If it wasn't for Maggie, I wouldn't be tied to Seacliff. I could go anywhere I wanted. Spain, Portugal, even the States. I have a cousin out there in Kentucky. I could finally be shot of Mummy. But I can't leave. I promised her I'd take care of Maggie. I thought she'd go soon after Mummy. But here we are, 3 years later, 2 bitter old bitches in a caravan, pandering to a dead woman's every whim. I'll just leave it there.
Very good, very good.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed that the vaccinations will ease things up, and perhaps in August, Jan, you would be a guest of ours for Scribes at the Rock to read from the book.
I thought you were going to say, hopefully we'll all get back to our caravans, but I think we might put people off going to caravans.
I once wrote a short story about a woman stuck with kids in a caravan. It may have been Ballycastle, and it was a nightmare scenario. There's nothing worse than being stuck with kids and playing cards in a caravan when it's pouring down in mid-July, at the top of the summer. So, okay, well, we'll be wrapping up shortly. And just, John, when you're currently, you've just finished the book, you're working away. I mean, how have you coped with the lockdowns? Have you remained sane? I see you've got lots of Bob Dylan books there in the background. Big fan of Bob Dylan.
Well, I did my master's degree on Bob Dylan, so a completely useless 2 years of my life, but an awful lot of fun. So that's the remnant of that is still there.
His memoir was brilliant.
Always fantastic. But where's the next part of it? We've been waiting now for, 20 years for the next part of it. I guess lockdown's been strange for me, Danny. I live by myself in a wee tiny house, and I have, writers are quite cerebral. We spend a lot of time in our own heads by ourselves. I have found it quite hard to be creative. I've been writing a lot of nonfiction. I've been writing a lot of first person, so all of the stories in The Last Resort are monologues. They're first person accounts from different people. I find it very hard to imagine anything outside of my own head, which I'm hoping will kick back in. My life is a wee bit like Niall's. Usually I travel a lot, so the year before the lockdown I was in 25 different countries with books. Wow. And you gather up experiences, and I mean, one of the biggest joys of the Firestarters, because it won the EU Prize for Literature, it put me in connection with lots of European writers from different places that have experienced conflict similar to us. And those conversations are they're so life-giving, but they also spark lots of ideas. And I'm missing all of that good stuff. There's only so, East Belfast is wonderful, don't get me wrong, but there's only so much inspiration you can take from looking at terraced houses all the time. So I would love to get out and begin looking for stories again. And hopefully as the summer moves on, that will start to happen.
Yeah, well, lots of Graham Greene's novels, of course, were set in different countries, the Dominican Republic, Vietnam, etc. So maybe you'll be able to get away like Graham Greene. And
yeah, and one of the things that I have been doing this year is, and I don't know if you're doing anything around this, but it's the centenary of Brian Moore's writing this year. So I am rereading through all of the Brian Moore novels. And he's a great traveller as well. You get Canada and America and all over the place. So I've been travelling with Moore for the last 3 months a wee bit. And books are such a great way to take us to different places, but it's not quite the same as, being in an art gallery or being in the sea or meeting people from actual different places in their home places.
And Niall, how have you been coping? I hear children in the background.
Well, yeah, I've my own son and my stepdaughter here in the house. They're 6 and 7, so it's hard for them. It is. I really wish we could take them out to places, and but there's a lot of checkpoints, and you would get fined here, and I live in Kildare at the minute, So, but I'm busy. I'm always press photographers, or I was covering floods in Cork 2 days ago, and then yesterday I was in Belfast covering Brexit stuff at the port, and a story about a wee sweet shop that's going to close down. Every kind of different thing you can imagine. So,
but it hasn't curtailed your movement in a sense, but just your social life and your family life.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I don't mean just your social.
Yeah, I can. We keep in good contact with the family now. By WhatsApp and Skype and all that there. So. But yeah, I really miss going to the theatre. That's the one thing I liked about Dublin, that you're spoiled for choice with plays and stuff down here, and I watched the online stream of that play Cypress Avenue, which Stephen Ray,
yeah, Dennis Sarah. Yeah,
I mean, it's a very surreal plot, but for me the interesting thing was this discussion between him and his psychiatrist, because she's a black woman from London, and she thought she was more English than him. And he was like, hang on, no, you're black. You can't be more English than me. And I thought it was a really interesting discussion about identity here, And my partner at the minute is a black woman from Brazil as well. And she really knows nothing about the conflict here. She's been living here for 18 years, So she's slowly but surely learned about it,
Some of us have been here for 68 years and still don't know or understand it.
Well, isn't that the famous saying? If you think the trouble's about, you don't know what it's about, She sent me a funny email there when we first started going out, saying, "Oh, I'm watching this show, Dairy Girls it's called. It's really funny, so it is. But I don't understand some of the jokes." And I said, "Well, tell me what it is." And she says, "What's an orange man?" And I was just like, "Oh God, this is going to be a long conversation here, So, but
just for the record, now, where do you keep your toaster?
Oh, definitely not in the cupboard. No.
John, where do you keep your toaster?
I'm really controversial. I don't have a toaster, so I don't know.
You're still using a fork against an electric fire?
Got a wee fire here, and I just hold my crumpet over the fire.
That is such a diplomatic answer. Well, folks, listen, thank you very much for that. That's been very, very interesting. And John, that invitation is live for August. Hopefully, we'll be out of the crisis, and life will get back to normal some way. So I'd like to thank Phil and Phobail for being the platform for these two very, very interesting interviews by Niall and Jan Carsons. Okay, folks, Garamagov, I'm Slán.
Thank you.
Thank you.